Hey, hello everybody out there. Welcome to this week's HackSurfer Hangout. This week we're going to be talking kind of compliance, things like PCI compliance and other kind of various forms with Barry Johnson. He's the president of Dara Security. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, I guess we can kind of kick it right off. I mean, if anyone is watching and you have any questions, if you're watching in Google, you can post them in the Q&A app, or you can tweet them. I got my Twitter handle on the screen. But yeah, just kind of to get started, maybe you can maybe give a little explanation about Dara Security and kind of your background and how you fit into that.
Sure. My background is I've been a security assessor for about 15 to 20 years. I've been involved in security for a little bit more than that, about 25 to 28 years. I started off as a computer programmer, moved into network engineering, and eventually became a corporate security officer at a contractor there in the DC area, and worked with doing a lot of intrusion responses and developing new tool sets and things like that when I lived in the area. I moved around a bit once they started passing out, various compliance requirements like PCI, HIPAA, with healthcare and whatnot. I started getting more involved in the commercial world as opposed to staying in the government sector, trying to help those clients understand what those requirements are, how they can apply them, and that type of thing. And about a year ago, I started my own company, Dara Security, that was more focused on medium and smaller businesses to help get them the same quality of expertise that I've been providing to larger companies. So that sums it up.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I think that's kind of the one area, where we kind of feel security is sort of lacking, or kind of lack of understanding with the smaller businesses. But kind of before we get too into certain issues around compliance, I mean, I guess you sort of hear a lot about it in the news, but mainly, you hear about PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance. I mean, those are the two that you kind of mentioned. I mean, is there any other kind of compliances that businesses have to worry about?
There are. The financial industry, banking in particular, they were one of the first ones. They had an act that was called GLBA. It stands for Grand Leach Bliley Act, and it was regarding for them to how to protect and set up security for their resources and the security of financial data. And it was one of the first ones that actually had a prescriptive measure for training people against social engineering on how to teach their tellers or to teach their customer service people not to give out information over the phone. And it's one of the few standards out there that does that. In addition, the education facilities, colleges and K through 12, they have an act called FERPA, which is more of a privacy act, but it talks about what educational data they can and cannot share. But on top of that, most of the states, I believe it's I think the latest count is 48 of them, 48 of the 50 states have all passed some type of privacy or data protection act as well that, I find a lot of small businesses and other companies just aren't aware of. Just like any other law, it gets passed, goes into effect, but it's not like there's somebody spreading the word that those things are impacting their business. So, and then when they have a breach, they get surprised when they get that civil lawsuit from the attorney general of the state saying, well, here's your fine, that type of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because I kind of wanted to ask you about that. A person say I wanted to set up a small business and I did. I mean, is there? I guess sounds like from what you're saying, there's really no one to kind of inform you about the regulations. I mean, I guess it would kind of be on me to sort of figure it out, but I would just imagine there's all sorts of businesses out there that really are kind of clueless and don't even really know what the laws are.
Yeah, exactly. I run into that all the time. If you're going to be a small business, you're going to take credit card data. Obviously, PCI is in the press, so you're kind of aware of that, unless, it's just not something you've been paying attention to. Unfortunately, even for small businesses, they're aware of PCI, but they don't know what the controls are or what they're required to do. And if you've ever seen one of those contracts that come from from a processor, it's like reading a will. So it's buried in there that says you agree to do these things. And so there's no one there to teach you, and the processor, all he cares about is get you signed up so he can start making money off your transactions. But at the same time, at the state level, just like any other business, they expect you to have done your research and know about it, and there's no one there to educate you about it. And it's not like it's the easiest thing to find or even understand. Just working with a small business attorneys, attorneys specialize in certain areas. And so if you don't have the right attorney, he's not even going to be able to make you aware of those issues. And the thing that's key to understand is, PCI talks about your customer's data, while the other state protection acts and things like that, they're looking more at your employee data. So even as a small business, they all think that, well, I'm only taking, maybe 5 or 6 credit cards a day, maybe 15 based on the size, but they forget that if they have 20 employees or even 5 or 8 employees, that information they took in order to register with the tax, for unemployment taxes and things like that, all that data they have to keep, they need to protect that as well, and that gets overlooked, and that's usually parts that bite them on the backside before, if they have an issue. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm kind of curious then, sort of like what the consequences are, like for a business. Like for example, just the other day there was like a Reddit thread that was basically talking about all sort of the awful practices that businesses are doing, in terms of credit cards and kind of not being PCI compliant. And then I read another article, I think it was in India, just saying that Consumer Reports were saying a lot of like hotel managers aren't even really aware of PCI compliance over there. So I just guess, just in terms of like what happens to a business, we don't really hear about that so much in the news. I mean, if I have a business and I'm not compliant, like any potential things that can happen to me.
Well, compliance is an interesting beast, because just like any other requirement or any other law, unless something goes wrong, no one's going to check on it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. PCI is a little bit different because they do check on the larger merchants, so like like Target, obviously, who everybody's heard about. But those types of companies, they do get checked on. They're required to, have their stuff inspected on an annual basis and things like that. But for a smaller business, all they have to do is basically, it happens in one of two manners. Either they have a very proactive processor or an acquirer, the person that processes their credit cards on the other side, and that person will reach out and say, we need to know where you stand with PCI compliance this year. However, in some cases, what happens is the small business will get their receipts from the credit card processor saying, it says, here's the credit cards that were processed, here's how much you've made off of it, here's our cut. But they started to find there's this fee, there's this PCI compliance fee that was added on, and it could range anywhere between 30, 50, 75 bucks a month, that the merchant was like, what is this all about? And it's because they call it the processor, and the processor saying, well, you haven't told us what your PCI compliance status is, so we're charging you a fine of $75 a month until you file it and let us know where you stand at. And so then the merchant, especially a small business, he opens up those compliance requirements. There's like 340 PCI compliance requirements. He's like, I don't even know how to answer these things. So now he's paying $75 a month because he just doesn't have time to answer them. But let's say he has a breach. Then they get a breach, and now suddenly he's on tap for Visa, MasterCard. They're going to show up with what they call a forensics investigator. That's going to cost him $10,000 minimum if he's had a breach. Then he's going to have to do a full-blown audit, which is going to cost anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 minimum. And then, more than likely, the state's attorney is going to get involved. There will be civil lawsuits that could range from anywhere, based on the number of people that were breached, to about $2,000 per record breached on up, obviously. And then he's got to pay for credit reporting for each individual that was breached for 2 years. So it can quickly, even for a small business that has a very small breach, it could quickly, get up into 6 figures. So chances are he's closing his doors if he has a breach. Mm-hmm. Someone like Target, who we obviously saw in the paper, they can absorb that type of thing, and they have insurance for it and that type and whatnot. But it can get costly, and it's sad because there are some simple steps up front that they can take to show their compliance and try to address. Especially for a small business, to address the issues, to at least make themselves not be an easy target. But yeah, there are fees that can be assessed. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you're working with these businesses, do you find that most of them are, I guess, pretty clueless? I mean, that's kind of my perception, but I mean, kind of curious to hear your thoughts.
They do come in 2 ways. Some of them are head in the sand. We just want to ignore it. I've never had an issue before. What makes you think I'm going to have one now? And so those guys are pretty clueless. we do have groups that are concerned about it. They want to try to take care of it, but they just don't know how. At least they're concerned. At least they're taking the step to realize they need to do something. And to be honest with you, Jeff, I find that more in the medical field, the smaller doctors' offices, they have higher concern because they also have HIPAA that they have to deal with, and obviously they don't want to get in trouble there, so then they start looking at other areas. While some of the smaller retailers, the mom and pop stores and things like that, they're just kind of like, we're just trying to make a buck, and as long as I can fly under the radar, I'm not going to worry about it. So it kind of breaks out like that.
Yeah, you mentioned before, you kind of having some simple things that businesses can do to kind of, avoid getting breached. Can you maybe just elaborate, on some tips for those people who are confused?
Sure. And quite honestly, it can be pretty simple enough. For a retailer that is, a single or maybe two stores and just accepting some credit cards, when they have that internet connection coming in, they want to make sure that, they probably have a cable modem or a DSL modem or whatever type of internet connection they have there. They want to make sure that whoever installs it for them, that they have it configured so there's no incoming access from the internet. It's crazy. We find some cable modems at the, like AT&T U-verse, they'll put in some business level cable modems. We've done some scans and taken a look at them, and you find out that there's an SSH port sitting there wide open just in case somebody needs to access it remotely to troubleshoot for the merchant. And you turn that off because, let's be honest, they're using a standard password across the table, that type of thing, something that's easily guessed, and it just doesn't need to be there. So if they can make sure that's turned off, that's easy enough. With their workstations inside the facility, just put strong passwords on, that type of thing. I find it happens all the time where you have 7 people and they all have the administrator password. They log in as admin, everybody has the same password and whatnot, which is a problem if that, because you can't track who's accessing data, and you'll have that bad actor within the organization that's just taking information. The other key one, especially say for gas stations, and especially if you're a mom and pop type gas station or a convenience store, go out and check those gas pumps for what they call swiper devices, or skimmer devices, where somebody may have come in and tampered with your with the swipe on top of the gas pump and installed what they call a skimmer. And these things can be incredibly small. They just slide right into the swiping device, and so when your customer swipes his card, it'll obviously your pump will register for payment, but that skimmer will record all that backstrike data, and then some guy comes back 2 weeks later and just picks it up and walks out the door with it, with all the data for 2 weeks of your customers. That's a very easy thing for somebody to go and do. And the other thing is just make sure your employees are aware of what they can and can't do with the credit card information or with customer data. And especially in small doctor's offices, make sure that that the folks there that are working in the front office or the back office are aware of what they can talk about. You don't want to have somebody looking at medical records going, oh my God, this guy has stage 4 cancer, and it's just on the other side of the reception hall, that type of thing. So there's some simple things they can do in that manner. So hopefully that was useful. So.
Yeah, definitely. We have a couple of questions coming in. One is from Richard. He wants to know, he says, what are your thoughts about biometrics on credit cards and leveraging other security technologies regarding PCI compliance? Is that a viable trend or a passing IT fad? And what really works versus what is designed to create more revenue streams for security-related companies?
That's a good question. I'm assuming for biometrics, that what we're asking there is biometrics as a viable authentication mechanism, not necessarily biometrics on the card itself, because in Europe and in Canada and just about everywhere else except the States, they're moving to what they call EMV and chip and pin. And here in the States, that's going to be a requirement by 2015, which basically, it's basically debit. It'd be just like a debit card transaction, except with a credit card where you have to type in a PIN. So hopefully, if I understand the question, biometrics for authentication. There's 2 camps there. With biometrics, you're saying that you're going to record a a digital signature, someone's fingerprint or iris scan or something like that, and it's going to get stored in a server. Me personally, having worked in the government arenas and things like that, if there's a target for me now as a hacker, I'm going to look for that biometric server that's storing all that data, because now I can replicate that all that digitally. And from an authentication standpoint, I don't find biometrics any stronger of an authentication mechanism than I would find two-factor authentication using a token and a PIN number. That's something that someone knows, and that type of thing. At the same time, and this is probably going to, this might rankle a little bit of people one way or the other on two-factor. I also don't find two-factor authentication much stronger than someone that's, say, using an actual passphrase or a sentence for a password versus just, say, a 7-character password that PCI requires. I don't know if that answers this question. Hopefully it does. But, yeah, that's kind of the way I'd fall out in that.
One other question we got out there from Eric. He says, I've heard a number of stories from low-level employees about companies storing payment information improperly and faking or falsifying PCI paperwork. Is there anything that can be done to spur the company to be more responsible without getting in trouble?
It's a good question. Unfortunately, there is no, I'm trying to think, I forgot what the government called that Whistler program they have. Unfortunately, the PCI industry, they don't have that same type of program. I fully understand what he's saying. I've come across many small businesses, or even mid-size and large, that I like to believe they think they're doing the right thing and they're not trying to hide something, but at the same time, you have to question that. Something's not going on right. But there is no whistle program. If it's someone you work for or whatever, you may be able to bring it to, maybe they have a security officer, you can bring it to their attention. Or something like that. At the end of the day, there just simply is not anyone to report it to. I guess you could try to report it to their processor, whoever's handling the credit cards on the back end for them. But at the same time, is somebody going to do anything? I couldn't tell you 100% one way or the other. You'd like to believe if you report it, somebody would, but it is what it is. It's the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had kind of mentioned earlier, we were talking about sort of partners, kind of like pushing different initiatives, kind of people that are sort of working with each other. I was kind of wondering if you could elaborate on that, because that's something I was sort of reading about the other day. Someone was kind of saying, sort of like the bigger companies kind of need to, I guess, kind of partner and sort of help out the smaller companies. I don't know if that's really kind of what you meant, or what you meant kind of by those different initiatives.
I'm sorry, Jeff, can you repeat that one more time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're just kind of talking about, I think when we were emailing back and forth, you kind of mentioned some stuff about sort of different partners kind of pushing sort of different initiatives, basically, in terms of. So I was just kind of wondering if you could elaborate on that, just because we've kind of talked about that a bit in the past, about how maybe like larger companies need to sort of help out those smaller companies, because that's kind of a vulnerable part for them.
I understand. One of the things I'm coming across a lot now, and I've been helping especially small businesses with that are working with larger partners, for example, you may have a consumer may have flood insurance, for example, with Liberty Mutual or the Hartford or whatnot, and when they had to file a claim, obviously the Hartford, they're not sending a Hartford employee out to do the cleanup. They're filing a claim and they're sending information to whoever the local floor repair guy is. That type of contractor. He's coming in local. What I'm finding is that local contractor has access into, say, the Hartford's applications, like the Hartford or the Liberty Mutual. They'll put the apps out there for the person to log into with his own user ID and password, and download claim information and consumer information, so he knows where to go, to do the cleanup. Well, what's happened is those large organizations have looked at it and said, holy smoke, we're giving these guys access to our customer data, and we're giving them access into our environment, and we want to make sure that someone can't break into his smaller network and then backhaul into ours. And so now they're actually starting to one, ask them questions, not just ignore them or say, oh, you're responsible for it, and just sign a contract saying you're responsible for it. We actually want to know how you're protecting yourself so that we know we're protected through your network. And they're giving them question sets. They're starting to give them guidelines for what they need to do so they can implement them. And in some cases, the ones that are more proactive are starting to try to educate these guys as well, not just throw it over the wall and say, go get this done, but actually start working with them so that they can have a more secure environment overall. So it's really, they're focused on themselves, but they're still helping that smaller guy stay secure so that they can continue to do good business and not have their customers get exposed. Does that make sense, Jeff, what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely does. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting that, there's been so many stories of kind of where the smaller guys have kind of been, like even with Target, for example, smaller guys were used to kind of attack the larger guys. So it's kind of, I guess it kind of makes sense that they're going that route.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, it's actually expanded beyond that in some cases. I mean, there was a case in Texas where they had the local catering business got hacked, and they came to find out the reason the catering business got hacked is because they were being the larger organization was being targeted, and they found that by hacking the catering business was the way to actually get into the larger organization. So it happens. So that's another reason why small businesses really need to pay attention to their overall security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I guess one other thing that sort of always comes up when you talk about PCI compliance is just, or any kind of compliance, I guess, is just, sort of the battle sort of between, is compliance enough? So I guess it's kind of interesting just thinking about that. Everyone kind of says compliance isn't enough, but it seems to me that most businesses, or a lot of businesses, aren't even really getting to the compliance stage. So it seems like kind of going beyond that is kind of, I don't know, kind of maybe reaching too far expectation-wise. I don't know if you kind of have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I understand. It kind of goes back to that overall aspect of, I was compliant. Did that mean I was secure? That type of thing. And that's a debate that occurs of does compliance mean security, or does security mean compliance? One of the key things for people to realize is that compliance, and especially even PCI, which is more prescriptive than some of the others out there, it's a minimum set of requirements focused on a particular data set. PCI is only focused on credit card data. HIPAA is only focused on patient data. For lack of a better term, they could give a flying flip about the rest of your network as long as you're protecting that data. And once again, like I said, it's minimum requirements. It's not guaranteeing that no one can break into your network or break in and steal that data. And so compliance is a good place to start, but by no means should they ever stop there and actually believe they're secure. It can be expanded. The requirements, say like in PCI, can be expanded to the rest of your network to help make it more secure. But like I said, it's not a place to stop. It's not a catch-all or a one-stop shop that's going to make everything, make all your issues go away. For example, within PCI, they have something where they require an annual penetration test and quarterly vulnerability scans. Well, that's great. It happens 4 times a year. The penetration test happens 1 time a year. But how often do exploits get released? There's exploits released daily. So believing that just by being compliant is making you secure is just it's a false sense of a false sense of security, if that answers the question. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess you kind of touched on this. I was just sort of wondering, if you're a small business, you kind of gave some tips, but I was sort of surprised that there's really no, follow-up in terms of making sure people are secure. But I guess that sort of would be like within sort of the PCI compliance itself, where they're sort of recommending that every 3 months you do that. So is that something that you see businesses actually doing, kind of like auditing themselves and checking themselves and following that, or do you think I don't know, kind of any other tips to sort of make sure people are kind of staying updated on those lines?
Well, with my business and what we do is we work with a lot of small businesses and take over that role for them to help make sure they stay secure and come in and do reviews, because we know they don't have the time to do it themselves, nor do they realistically have the budget to actually have their own security officer. So we kind of play that outsourced role for them. So for clients like that, they're trying to take that step to stay more active, to make it a business process, something they look at on a daily basis, whether it's in-house or something that they've tried to outsource. For the other organizations, like you said, there's no checkup on them. And there's no, quite honestly, Jeff, there's no verification that they answered the questions correctly in the first place or truthfully. To go back to an earlier question, and so they just send it in, and by signing that that document that says, yeah, we're doing everything PCI requires, if they're not doing it, it just gets them in bigger trouble later on down the road if they actually have a breach. They're just hedging their bets until they have an issue. So and it happens. I think the latest stats that I read here recently in the last month or so was that from a small business here in the United States, that I believe it was like 60% have actually experienced some type of breach. And understand, a breach doesn't necessarily mean a hacker broke in. It could be malware broke out into their environment and actually corrupted data, or it could have been an internal employee. I mean, we just recently had one here locally where an internal employee, she would take the credit card to the back, swipe it through the POS system, and then swipe it on a skimmer attached to her belt. That's a breach, that type of thing. It just happens. And there's no checks, there's no check or balances that comes out from PCI or anyone, whether it's PCI, and quite frankly, even HIPAA, that they'll go back and check and make sure folks are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I know earlier, just to speak to this real quick, we talked about fines that would occur. Doctors' offices from HIPAA fines, the smallest fine that I've seen so far is about $100,000, and that comes straight down from the federal government, and that doesn't include anything else except for that fine. So, and that happens. I've seen it happen to small doctors' offices as well. So, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I guess I just kind of wanted to get sort of like a, I don't know, big picture kind of perspective, because reading all the stories and kind of doing things like this and talking to different experts, it just seems, I don't know, you get the impression it's just a total disaster out there in terms of, especially like in healthcare, we've heard a lot of terrible stuff about that, and in terms of all these breaches. I mean, overall, do you think it really is that bad out there, or is that just we're always hearing the negative stories and never the positive ones?
Well, I think we do hear a lot of the negative stories. From what I've seen with mid-sized businesses and smaller, I think it could be a lot better. To be honest with you, I don't think it's I'm not going to run around saying the sky's falling, but I think it could be a lot better at the mid-size. And I think they are starting, especially the mid-size guys are starting to actually look at it a little bit more. And I think it is being driven by their larger partners coming back saying, are you doing this, are you doing this, as opposed to them solely taking that initiative. I do have a handful of clients that are very proactive, but a lot of them I've gotten here recently have been because one of the larger partners have come to them and said, are you doing these things? The guy's like, I don't know what these things are. So I think it will get better. It's just taking time. And I think it's taken a lot more time than the credit card industry or anybody else thought it really would. So.
Yeah, we're just about out of time. I just wanted to really quick ask one more question. One thing we've sort of been asking everyone is just kind of getting their thoughts on encryption, because it's basically been like, I guess, the 1 year anniversary since, 1 year and a month now since Snowden kind of came out, and all the NSA stuff, and so there's been a lot of people sort of talking about encryption and sort of people saying encryption is the answer, Snowden included. So just kind of trying to get everyone's thoughts, just kind of real general on encryption, if you think it kind of is the answer or isn't the answer to a lot of these problems.
That's a good question. I'm a big fan of encryption. I encrypt my laptop. I encrypt most of my communications back and forth and whatnot. But at the end of the day, encryption's only as good as the protection of the keys that are being, whether it's a symmetric or asymmetric encryption being used, using public-private keys or a shared key. If somebody takes that key or they're able to do collect enough data, they're going to recover the information. So the key with encryption, sorry, I just cracked myself up. The big thing with encryption is realize that the strength of the algorithm needs to be strong enough to protect the data for as long as it's valuable. So with the credit card industry, they have a requirement for encrypting the credit card numbers, and that credit card number has to be use an algorithm that can secure it for up to 3 years, because that's how long those numbers are associated with other information is actually a valid number. I don't know if that answers your question. My focus would with encryption is the strength of the keys. It has absolutely nothing to do with the algorithm. I remember back in the day when they talked about DES being broken and things like that. It wasn't really broken. It was actually, it just became so much easier to brute force the 56-bit key with the technology at the time that it was a useless algorithm now. Encryption is just going to have to stay ahead of the people's abilities to recover ciphertext from it. That's really the key. It won't, but it is, right now, it's the best way we have to protect data and communications. And so if you can use it, I highly recommend it. So.
All right. Well, thanks. We appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you inviting me on and giving me an opportunity.
All right. Well, everyone out there, have a good day, and we'll do this again next week.
All right. Take care, sir.